Salve discipuli. All right, today we learned the new grammar for lesson 50. So this is the new grammar for lesson 50. We're going to talk about just one topic today, and that is what's called a deponent verb. What is a deponent verb? A deponent verb is a verb that is probably going to look passive, but it will actually be active. This might annoy some of you. There are going to be some words in Latin that fall into this class of deponent verbs. They will sometimes look passive, sometimes they will look active, but either way they will always be translated actively. So when you see a deponent verb, no matter what it looks like, it could look active, it could look passive, you're always going to translate it actively. Perhaps you're wondering why these exist. So am I. Let's move on. So let's take a quick look at some easy parts of a deponent verb. All right. And by the way, if you have your books open to page 290 or 291, so you can look at the vocab, that will make this all a lot easier. So 290, 291, so you can peek at the vocab. Let's start with this word, hortantibus. That comes from our deponent verb, hortor, hortari. You'll note the NT in there, plus a third declension ending. That is a present active participle. So hey, guess what? That looks active. Guess what? It's going to be active. This is pretty easy. NT plus third declension. That means verbing. So this means what class? Encouraging, coming from hortor. That was easy. A present active participle looks active, is active. This is simple. What about konatoros? Note the UR. Hey, this looks like a future active participle. You're right. It is a future active participle. That UR plus a first or second declension ending gives it away. So guess what? It looks active. It is active. This means what class? That's right. About to try. Or fixin' to try. Or I'm sure some of you are thinking destined to try. They are all correct. Let's look at one more. Pollicatorum esse. That's not a participle. That is UR plus esse. That's a future active infinitive. Hey, it looks active. It is active. This is easy stuff. This word means to be about to promise. So far, people, these deponent verbs are nothing unusual. They look active. They are active. Okay, this is pretty simple. All right, let's see if we can get a little more complicated. Let's take a look at the actual conjugations of these verbs. Okay? Since each deponent verb is basically the passive form of a normal verb, the conjugations will look like this. A first conjugation, deponent verb, will look like this. It will end in or in the first part, ari in the second. For example, konor, konari. So if you see this or ari, you're like, hey, that's a deponent verb, and it's in the first conjugation. If it's second conjugation and it's deponent, and to be clear, a verb is either deponent or it's not. Okay? You can't pick a word, a verb that you've already learned, and say, hey, I'm going to make that deponent. Not going to work. It's either deponent or it's not. Some of you are going to catch me on this later. I look forward to that. Okay. But for now, it's either deponent or it's not. So, a second conjugation deponent verb, eor, eri, like polliceor, pollicere, pollicatus. A third conjugation deponent verb will go or, e, just like loquor, loqui. A third io, or a third I stem if you prefer. Okay, that will go eor, e, just like patior, pati. And finally, a fourth conjugation will go eor, iri, just like orior, oriuri. Okay, so we might be clever enough to notice that all of these are basically just your typical passive infinitive forms. Those are your present passive infinitives. You've seen them before. I. Okay? We're probably clever enough to notice these are just our first person singular present passive forms. Okay? So that's what we're looking at here. This is basically just the passive form of a normal verb. Now when you get to your last part, okay, your third part, this gets a little more complicated. This is going to be something that I'll explain later because I think your heads will explode if I try it right now. So, long story short, just realize this is the part they're going to use as if it were a fourth principal part. Okay? All right, let's look at some examples. It's okay if you're a little confused right now. The examples should help you out. Okay, so number 8. Conaris. Okay, this comes from the word conor, conari. So it looks passive with that ris ending, but hey, conor, conari is a deponent verb. So guess what? It's not going to be passive in meaning. It's going to be active. So this is really simple. Ris tells us the subject is you. Sure, it looks passive, but it's going to be active. So this will mean you try. That's it. That's active, but that's how it works. You'll note the E here, so it's technically a present subjunctive, so maybe we should say something like, may you try. Number 9, polikear. Polikear. That comes from polikeor, polikeri, a deponent verb. How do I know it's deponent? It goes aor, airy in the dictionary entry. If you look it up, it goes aor, airy, which is a second conjugation deponent verb. Once I know it's deponent, I know that it might look passive, but it will still definitely be active. Okay? So, how am I going to translate that? Well, the R at the end tells me that the subject is I. So I know this is going to basically mean I promise. Note the EA here. That tells me it's present subjunctive, so this is probably something like, let me promise. Okay, but notice I'm translating it actively. Why? Because deponent verbs look passive, but they get translated actively. Number 10, loquitur. What the heck's going on here? This is from loquor loqui. So if you look it up, you'd see loquor loqui, and hopefully your books are open so you can see it. That or E is an example of a third conjugation deponent verb form. So guess what? This is going to look passive, but be active. So here's our tour. Okay, we know tour tells us the subject is he, she, or it. We know this looks passive, but since it's a deponent verb, it's going to be active. So this would simply be, what class? That's right. He speaks. He speaks, or she speaks, or it speaks, if you prefer. Okay, so hopefully you're not incredibly lost yet. One more slide, and then I'll cut you guys loose. No, that's the wrong slide. It's still on the same slide. Ha 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 ha. Okay, number 11. Loquora. What the heck is that? That looks to me like that should be the second principal part of a verb. Okay? Like for example, if I had amo amare, loquora looks just like an amare form. Here's the trick, and this is something most people will have forgotten because it's really rare. This form here in a normal verb can mean to love, but it can have another less common meaning. It can also be a passive command. This can mean to love, or it can be a passive command meaning, hey you, be loved. So guess what? If this loquora is really trying to be the passive command, but it still should be translated actively because it's a deponent verb, this should mean, hey you, speak. Okay? This really truly looks like a passive command, but it's really got to be acting like an active command because it's deponent. So this means speak. That's a tricky concept. One more, and then I will cut you loose. Portare. Similar to loquora. It looks like the second part of a dictionary entry for a regular verb. which means it could be a passive command form. But again, since hortor, hortari is a deponent verb, it's not going to be a passive command, it's just going to be an active command. So this will simply mean what, class? That's right, encourage. Some of you probably said bless you, so thank you. All right, that is all we've got today. Hopefully that'll put you in a position where you can tackle your actual homework, which is it's exercise A. I only want you to try numbers 1 through 3. So exercise A, numbers 1 through 3, written out on turn-inable paper. It's on page 291. Take a few minutes to try to tackle that. That is all. And I imagine some of you will still have questions on this, no doubt about it. But do the best you can with this introduction. Okay, wa later.